Hey everyone, thanks for joining today. This is Jason with NetNet Academy/LA Network. If I sound congested, I'm sorry. It's allergy season here in Southern California, and I'm definitely feeling that. Today, we're going to be covering customer gateways and private virtual gateways. We're going to put those two together because they often work together. As always, if you're appreciating or enjoying the content here, then consider giving us a like and a subscribe. If you're not, or if you are, either way, consider leaving a comment, letting us know what is or is not working, right? We're really open to trying to do better in that regard. With that being said, let's go ahead and hop in and see how these gateway objects are doing. Thanks for joining today. We're hopping right in here with our second video on the gateway series. And today we're going to be covering private virtual gateways and customer gateways. They often go hand in hand. Let's start with the VGW. So this is basically used to create a site-to-site VPN between, say, your office and your VPC. It doesn't have to be your office. In fact, when I first started doing AWS, we use these a lot of times to build overlays because gateway objects like the transit gateway had not yet been released or even invented, I suppose. So, but I see it a lot of times where you'll build a site-to-site VPN from your VPC back to some other location, a colo, a headquarters, something. And the way we do that a lot of times in AWS is with a VGW. Now, it's important to understand that this is a site-to-site VPN only. You cannot do client access or remote access VPNs to the VGW construct, right? When you run your VPN up there, one end is terminated on the VGW. What terminates the other end of the VP or the VPN is considered a customer gateway. And we'll talk more about customer gateways in the next slide, but just be aware it is an example of a customer gateway, right? You could either do static routing or dynamic routing via BGP on the VGW. Be aware that you only get 50 routes by default, and you can up that. It's a soft limit, but you have a hard limit of 100 routes. So what you probably don't want to do if you're running BGP is, reflect your entire route table up there. You'll probably crash your VPC intrinsic router. So you need to be careful in what you send up there. Maybe you just send a default, or perhaps you send a summary for your internal routes, like maybe they're 10.0.0.0/8 or something like that. So you just need to be aware of that. And you should also be aware that encrypted throughput is capped at approximately 1.25 gigabits per second. This is an AWS limitation. I think that's a rough estimate because I rarely see it go above 1 gig. So it might be, if we idealize our packets, maybe we get that 1.25, or perhaps I haven't really done a ton of testing, but I've done a few iPerf tests. And usually to me seems to max at around 1. But in theory, it gets up to 1.25 gig. Which isn't anything to sneeze at, but it's also not super scalable, especially if you start scaling out. We'll probably look at some other options for when we scale out. What can we do, right? Now, one thing to be aware of is when you build one of those site-to-site VPNs to a VGW, you can actually download a pre-built VPN configuration for many devices and firewalls, right? It could be a FortiGate or a PAN or a Cisco, all sorts of things. And it might even be able to be multiple different types of VPN technology within any one of those vendors. I think Cisco, for example, has 3 or 4 different sub options. If you want to do it on iOS, or you want to do it on an ASA, or you want to do it on a FTD or something like that. So just be aware of that. Now, you don't have to, by the way, you do not have to use the VGW to terminate your VPNs. You could do a customer gateway to customer gateway. I could have some kind of third party device like a Palo Alto firewall or something in there, and I could run my IPsec to that instead. If you had like maybe a security requirement for your enterprise where we only do VPNs on devices that we have full administrative control on, because the VGW, and we'll see this when we get into the console in a couple sessions, has very limited ability for you to manipulate it. Okay. You'll see that the way we build the VPNs is pretty basic. So that's the VGW or private virtual gateway. When we talk about customer gateways or CGWs, that is really any routing device, whether it's in AWS or not, that AWS does not administer, but that AWS shares routes with. Okay. That's why I say if you have like an on-prem firewall or router that's running your BGP process to the VGW across an IPsec tunnel, that firewall or that router is an example of customer gateway. Another example of a customer gateway might be something along the lines of an SD-WAN solution. You know, a lot of SD-WAN solutions, they have like a WAN and a LAN side of things, or a transport and service side of things, or something like that, inside, outside, however you want to think about it. And so you might do something along the lines as well. Maybe you don't even have a VGW, but you might do something like put a third-party routing device in your VPC for your SD-WAN, set up an IGW, which we've already covered, right, to bring in a lot of SD-WAN tunnels or something like that. Well, those SD-WAN routers are another example of customer gateways. If you were to have private circuits, that's called direct connects with AWS, the routers that those direct connect circuits terminate on, the fiber has to plug in somewhere. The router that plugs into, or at least that holds the BGP adjacency on your direct connect, that router is also an example of a customer gateway. You can see customer gateways are much more common probably than VGWs, because VGWs have a single purpose, and that is IPsec, whereas customer gateways are any routing object not administered by AWS, however, sharing a routing process with AWS. So hopefully that makes some sense. And you can catch me on the next section. We'll probably do a lab and cover IGWs and CGWs, but we'll see how it goes. Thank you. Okay, that covers customer gateways and private virtual gateways. The two items we want to do, just as a quick reminder, customer gateway is any routing object that AWS routes with, but does not control. Mostly that's going to mean, in our cases as traditional network engineers, it usually means a third-party routing device, whether it's an SD-WAN router, whether it's a VPN firewall, whether it's some other device. It could also be some kind of a routing service that maybe you get, like a middle mile provider that provides a direct connect like service, but not quite direct connect. And then don't forget, on the private virtual gateways, we typically use those to route BGP across an IPsec tunnel, right? And AWS does a pretty good job of pre-building those configs. However, don't just paste them in without going through it. Or if you're using a GUI-based firewall, don't just click, 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 next, finish, without looking through it. You should adhere to your security policies if at all possible, and your configuration policies if at all possible. The downside is the VGW is a fixed concept, right? There's not much we can do to troubleshoot it. So if you have a standard and they just don't have it in the VGW, then you cannot use it. Now, you could always build your own overlay, not use the VGW, but put a network appliance in there, basically another customer gateway in there, and run your VPN there or something like that. But that gets very expensive and you're going to struggle with scalability at a cost level. Anyway, I hope you're getting something out of this. I think next session we will do a lab and we'll go through internet gateways, customer gateways, and private virtual gateways. Thanks so much. And